Hello, everyone. Earlier today, I received a notice from the German authorities informing me that I'm prohibited from speaking to you today and threatening me with criminal penalties, including fines and up to 1 year in prison if I defy this order. Here it is. It's actually 15 pages long. Obviously, since I'm in the United States, I'm beyond the jurisdiction of the Berlin regime. I assume that they could still open a criminal proceeding against me in Germany and try to harass me in that manner. But whether I were physically in Germany or not, my response would be exactly the same. I do not take orders from a regime that is an accomplice in genocide. And I take inspiration from the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote in 1963, while he was jailed in Birmingham, Alabama, for civil disobedience against the white supremacist regime here in the United States, he wrote the following, and I quote, "There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." End of quote. And of course, I take inspiration from that. And I'm solely responsible for my choice. No one else is responsible for my actions. You may recall that I was supposed to join you virtually in April to speak at the Palästina Kongress in Berlin. But of course, as we all know, the jackbooted thugs of the Berlin regime raided the conference, cut off the electricity, and shut it down in the most brutal and authoritarian manner. They imposed an entry ban on the great Dr. Hassan Abu Sittah, who had spent 43 days treating victims of the German-backed Zionist genocide in Gaza. But the Berlin regime stopped him at the airport and deported him. Because I had not planned to travel to Germany in person myself in April, we were not sure if the Berlin regime had also imposed a similar ban on me. But in recent weeks, with the help of a lawyer, we determined that, in fact, the Berlin regime did also impose a political ban on me and a travel ban, which they have now renewed. Of course, I'm not the only one to face this fascistic repression from the regime in Berlin, and I'm aware that others face even more unjust persecution by these undemocratic thugs. I want to express my solidarity with everyone in Germany being persecuted by this regime, beaten in the streets and silenced in the press and in universities when you speak out against the German-backed Zionist genocide. I want particularly to express my solidarity with Palestinians and their Jewish comrades in Germany being persecuted by the authorities for standing up for Palestinian rights and liberation. Germany is a country today where Jews are targeted, arrested, beaten, and banned for speaking out against the totalitarian, racist, fascist, genocidal ideology of Zionism. It is a country where Palestinians face state-sanctioned hatred and incitement simply for being Palestinian. It is a shocking and painful reality, but I want you to know that people all over the world stand with you, and we look forward to the day when the darkness lifts from over Germany and Europe, and we witness the dawn of democracy and freedom. In my comments now, I want to focus on a question that no doubt concerns many of us. Why is the regime in Berlin, which claims to be a modern democracy that has learned the so-called lessons of history, once again supporting, arming, funding, and participating in a genocide, the genocide of the Palestinian people being perpetrated by the Zionist regime occupying Palestine? How can the German state, after perpetrating holocausts against the Herero and Nama people and against Jewish, Sinti, and Roma people in Europe, be supporting a Zionist regime whose rhetoric and actions rival those of the Nazis in terms of scale, horror, and cruelty? I think part of the answer lies in debunking the myth that after World War II, West Germany, and now the reunified Germany, ever learned any lessons. There is the myth, which you are no doubt all taught in your schools, that after the war, there was a process of denazification, and that Germany got rid of its past and built a future based on democracy, human rights, tolerance, and European integration. Of course, any person who came from Turkey or Morocco or even Southern Europe during the 1950s until the 1970s to provide the labor for the so-called Wirtschaftswunder would have known very well that Germany never purged itself of deep and pervasive racism, only that the identity of the targets of this age-old hatred had changed. But let me focus on the so-called denazification, which was in fact very short-lived and very shallow. It very quickly after the war, the United States brought many top Nazis back into the government of West Germany in the context of the Cold War against the new enemy, the Soviet Union. Of course, although it's unfashionable in Europe to say it today, it was the Soviet Union which was primarily responsible for defeating the Hitler government. But the fear of communism led the Americans and their European vassals to embrace once again the Nazis, even if they now no longer called themselves Nazis and wore business suits instead of uniforms. We can see this all over the history of West Germany. Perhaps most notoriously, Kurt Kiesinger, who was Chancellor of West Germany in the 1960s, had been an active Nazi during the Hitler government. This was revealed by the journalist Beate Klasfeld, who showed how Kiesinger had close ties to Hitler's foreign minister von Ribbentrop and to Joseph Goebbels, the head of the German government's propaganda ministry during the Hitler administration. According to Klasfeld, Kiesinger was responsible for Nazi propaganda, including anti-Semitic radio broadcasts, and he worked closely with the SS. But he was not the only one. You will find today that many of the institutions of modern Germany were founded by or with Nazis. The first president of the German intelligence service, the BND or Bundesnachrichtendienst, was Reinhard Gehlen, who worked for the Nazi regime for the entire period from 1933 to 1945 and was the head of Hitler's anti-Soviet intelligence organization. Following the war, Gehlen continued to operate the so-called Gehlen Organization, a secret anti-communist organization closely affiliated with the CIA. The Gehlen Organization was made up of many senior Nazis. In 1956, the government of West Germany formally turned the Gehlen Organization into the BND, and under the instructions of Konrad Adenauer, the BND hired many veterans of Hitler's SS and SD. Much of this history was revealed decades ago when the United States declassified a large number of documents related to its dealings with Nazis after World War II. Nazism infested many other aspects of the West German state. For example, in 2016, there was a famous study that found that the West German Justice Ministry was infested with Nazis until long after the war. It found that in 1957, 77% of senior ministry officials were former members of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, a higher proportion even than during the Third Reich. The study found that between 1949 and the early 1970s, 90 of the 170 top ministry officials were former Nazi Party members, and many had served as judges who had handed down death sentences during the Hitler administration. There is even an article in Der Spiegel from 2012 headlined "The Role Ex-Nazis Played in Early West Germany," and it states that, quote, "New documents reveal just how many officials from the Nazi regime found new jobs in Bonn. A surprising number were chosen for senior government positions," end quote. But in reality, this would not have been a surprise to anyone in power. We should note, by contrast, that in the German Democratic Republic, there was a systematic process of denazification, although, of course, it could not be total. Of course, the phenomenon of renazification was not limited just to West Germany. In fact, one could argue that rehabilitating and employing former members of the Hitler administration is the very basis of NATO and the Western Alliance. Under Operation Paperclip, the United States brought thousands of Nazis to America, perhaps the most famous being the missile scientist Wernher von Braun, without whose efforts the Americans would not have managed to reach the moon. And across Europe, under Operation Gladio, the Americans armed secret anti-communist units, part of the so-called stay-behind armies, and many former Nazis were involved in that. The CIA also used gangs of former Nazis to foment an anti-communist uprising in Hungary in 1956, and these Nazis were responsible for massacring hundreds of Jews in the streets of Budapest under the pretext of fighting communism until the Soviet intervention put a halt to the massacres. Of course, this history is contrary to everything that you have perhaps taught in German schools. It's contrary to what I was taught too, but it's the reality. It is therefore no wonder that West Germany, as a vassal of the American Empire, stood on the wrong side of every liberation struggle after World War II. It is no wonder, for example, that West Germany adamantly opposed and resisted sanctions against apartheid South Africa, the racist regime whose leaders admired and modeled themselves on the Nazis. By contrast, the German Democratic Republic stood on the right side of every international struggle. It supported an armed liberation movements in Africa, including South Africa, against the barbarism of European colonialism. And it supported the legitimate Palestinian resistance against Zionist colonization, occupation, and oppression. So it is no wonder today that NATO is allied with the most nationalistic Nazi elements in Ukraine in a disastrous proxy war against Russia. For these fanatical true believers, the current war in Ukraine is a continuation, as they accused Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, of supporting Waffen-SS Nazis in Ukraine. But that is the truth, as Germany is arming and supporting a Ukrainian regime and Ukrainian military that includes units such as the Azov Battalion, among others, who openly identify with the Waffen-SS Galicia division, which played a key part in assisting Hitler to exterminate Jews and Poles in what is now Western Ukraine. Today, Germany is sending weapons to Ukraine and supporting the direct heirs of the Waffen-SS units that helped to exterminate people there. This is, of course, a sensitive point for the rulers of the so-called Federal Republic, as I found out. And we can also say that some of the propaganda methods of the Nazis are still very much in use by the current regime in Berlin. Take, for example, Annalena Baerbock again. During an official celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Federal Republic in Berlin at the end of May, she faced protests from German citizens opposed to Germany's support for the ongoing Zionist Holocaust against the Palestinian people. She responded by claiming that the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians was justified by the supposed atrocities carried out by Hamas on October 7th. And she claimed that she had personally watched a video filmed by members of Hamas of them raping Israeli women, except that no such video exists. That was the conclusion not only of a UN team which examined all of the audiovisual material provided by the Israeli government, but also of several Israeli security agencies who told the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that there is no video or photo evidence of any such sexual attacks taking place. There was only one German journalist, as far as I know, who challenged Baerbock's lies at the Federal Press Conference. That was Florian Warweg. But instead of withdrawing her lies, the German government smeared Mr. Warweg as an anti-Semite. The same lie that Hamas members filmed themselves raping Israeli women was repeated a few days later by Chancellor Olaf Scholz at a European election rally in Leipzig. This is atrocity propaganda, Gräuel propaganda, similar to that used by the Nazis, who also claimed that Jewish men were corrupting and raping Aryan German women. In the current context, it counts as incitement to genocide, which is a crime under the 1948 Genocide Convention. I therefore use this platform to call for Annalena Baerbock and Olaf Scholz, among others, to be investigated, charged, and tried under the Genocide Convention for incitement to genocide, along with their other willful and knowing criminal acts of complicity and participation in the ongoing Zionist genocide of the Palestinians people. We must also note here that the regime in Berlin is intervening at the International Criminal Court to block arrest warrants for the genocidal war criminals Benjamin Netanyahu and his war minister Yoav Gallant. This is particularly perverse since the ICC is born out of the legal legacy of the Nuremberg trials, which brought some of the Nazi leaders to justice after World War II. Of course, I say some, since the others were given senior positions in the West German government. Finally, I want to address Germany's unconditional support for the illegitimate, racist, genocidal, settler colonial Zionist regime in Palestine. Today, Hitler's successors in the Reichstag and the Chancellery in Berlin claim that their support for Israel is born out of contrition and atonement for the crimes of the Hitler administration. The undeniable reality, however, is that the close relationship between Germany and Zionism long predates both the Second World War and the Holocaust. Before Zionism was adopted by some Jews, it was originally an anti-Semitic Protestant Christian project to redefine European Jews as aliens belonging to Asia, not as Europeans belonging to Europe. It was a fanatical millenarian project to remove Jews from Europe, in which German Protestants played a major part. And while the Nazi regime persecuted and then carried out a genocide against Jews, it did not necessarily view Zionism as its enemy. There is a long documented history of collaboration between the Nazis and the Zionists at the expense of Jews. One of the more notorious episodes was the agreement between Resho Kastner, the Zionist leader in Hungary, and Adolf Eichmann. Under the agreement, the Zionist organization in Hungary helped the Nazis to deport hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews to their deaths in Auschwitz in exchange for allowing a small number of Zionists to escape to Switzerland. After the war, Kastner went to Zionist-occupied Palestine and became an official in the Israeli government. There was also, of course, the notorious 1933 Ha'avara, or transfer agreement, between the Hitler administration and the Zionist Federation of Germany, which broke the boycott of Germany called for by Jews in the United States and other countries. These are only examples which, while probably not taught in Germany, are well documented. So it is important to understand that Germany's support for Zionism and for the ongoing Zionist genocide of the Palestinian people is not a break with Germany's past, but a continuation of it, just like the regime in Berlin today is in many ways a Nazi continuation regime. So we must understand what we are fighting to overcome. When Germany sends weapons to Israel today, it is to perpetrate genocide, to advance settler colonialism, racial supremacy, and oppression. What a travesty it is to claim that these horrible crimes are being done as any sort of atonement for Germany's crimes during the Holocaust. By supporting another genocide, this time against Palestinians, Germany is spitting on the memories of the Jews it murdered during the Holocaust. By trying to criminalize support for Palestinian liberation, Germany aims to legitimize oppression. By spreading atrocity propaganda and lies, Germany is assisting and attempting to justify the extermination of Palestinian men, women, and children. But history is not on Germany's side, and it is not on the side of Zionism. The world is rising up in solidarity with the just Palestinian struggle for liberation and for a future where Palestine is a decolonized land of freedom, justice, and equality for all who live in it, regardless of religion or ethnicity. Nothing is more certain than this. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you.